the hall doesn't like it, they've got two choices in my eyes. They can either change to adapt to the new way of doing business, or they can shut down, one or the other. But you don't go across the hall and say you're being unfair, because he's not being unfair. He's just better at what you're supposed to be doing than you are.
Again, good arguments. I don't know, ultimately, maybe the case gets thrown out, and maybe these are the reasons why the case gets thrown out. But I want to touch on another related topic here, and that is whether or not at this age, in this age group, and I think it's from, if I'm not mistaken, from 11 to 17 years of age.
Yeah, I think so.
In that range anyway, where hormones are literally out of control.
Right.
Okay. It actually makes sense to have an exclusive boys organization and an exclusive girls organization. And, having camping and those kinds of activities
and canoeing,
that
archery, and all that stuff.
Co-ed is a recipe for problems, okay? Now, maybe the majority of boys and girls don't get into trouble, but enough do, given the opportunity. And look, one of the problems, and I don't know how extensive this was, but one of the allegations was that there was a lot of sexual abuse, homosexual abuse in the Boy Scouts, where boys were abused by older boys and even by Scout leaders, okay? So how, and that's a separate issue from the legal case about gender discrimination that went on, okay, that we were referring to a minute ago. But how you're already saying, and the Boy Scouts paid out a very large settlement recently to settle those lawsuits, okay, the sexual abuse lawsuits. Yep. If that is so rampant, or has been so rampant in the Boy Scouts, okay, it's just an example, it's an illustration of out-of-control hormones. And, whatever one's view on homosexuality or not, this is an illustration of how young men and teenage boys will act. If they're acting this way towards one another, is there anyone that truly believes that this kind of activity is not going to happen heterosexually, and that you're not going to have Scout leaders abusing young girls or older Scouts abusing younger Scouts of the opposite gender?
Well, why would it be any different?
And then you have the consensual, to the degree that 13 and 14 and 15-year-olds could give it proper informed consent, or even 16 and 17-year-olds. You're not only do you have the homosexual problem, but now you have a heterosexual problem where they're actually consenting to what they're doing. So this is just opening up a huge can of worms, a huge Pandora's box as far as I'm concerned.
Well, I think that Baden-Powell I don't know if he understood it the way that you and I would understand it today, but there was a reason why the girls and the boys didn't blend at that age. It was because of a lot of the things, because let's face it, sex is as old as mankind. It's not new. And the temptations that come with it are not new or unique to this generation, as much as this generation would want you to believe otherwise.
You don't mean mankind, you mean people kind.
No, I definitely mean mankind. And
that was a Justin Trudeau joke, by the way.
Yes, I realize.
No, just for our listeners.
Oh, okay.
You got it. But
if you're not from Canada, then look it up. Just Google people kind, and you'll find out. Anyway, the point is that why you have this happening, it's not unique to Boy Scouts. In every situation where you have older people in positions of authority that are over younger people, this kind of thing happens. It happens in churches of all denominations. It happens in we've seen it happen in hockey leagues. We know about the Boy Scouts. Undoubtedly, it happens in the Girl Scouts too. Maybe not to the same degree, but it happens. And every time you turn around, in high school sports, all these kind of different groups and clubs, I'm not saying that these are bad, inherently evil things, but mankind is a flawed creature. And sooner or later, these kind of things are going to happen. And rather than deny them, rather than go after, tear each other apart because for whatever reason, they should be looking at ways and saying, okay, we recognize this problem. Let's develop protocols to make sure it doesn't. And a lot of organizations have already done that. The Air Cadets is an example, or cadets in Canada have very strict protocols about the fraternizing of cadets, especially at summer camp. I've been down that road a number of times with our own kids, talking about the kind of things that have been alleged to have gone on and have been dealt with and how. So I'm not going to go down that road. But the bottom line is, when you have organizations, and on top of that, on top of everything else, it's very healthy for young men and young girls to be separate and learn from each other. And let's take the Boy Scouts as an example. When you have the Boy Scouts set aside and they can just be boys without having to worry about every word or every gesture being taken out of context, they grow up more mature, they grow up more well-balanced, and the same thing on the girls' side. Because when the hormones are raging, they're not in each other's company, and they can talk with and deal with this stuff, in a much more mature way.
We're just looking at the clock.
Yeah, we're just making sure we're not going over our time, because time waits for no one.
Yeah, we're not going over time. No, you're right, Nick. I'm a very big believer in trying to think of what the right term is in separating boys and girls, young men and young women. I believe in boys' schools. I believe in girls' schools. I believe in segregated classes, gender segregated classes. I understand that that's becoming much more difficult now, given the gender bending that we're engaged in on an official level. But the reality is that that boys will be boys, girls will be girls, and it takes some time and a process of maturing before you can have them, I think, mixing in a responsible way. Back in the day, when we were growing up, well, I guess we're still a little too young, but in our parents' day, even our parents, okay, and I'm not referring to my parents.
That's the royal our parents.
The royal our parents. Even then, I mean, there was no fraternizing. It doesn't mean that they didn't do programs and activities together, but there were always older adults who were there, who were prominent, who were enforcing some degree of propriety at these events. They were called chaperones.
That's right.
Okay, but today we don't even have chaperones. And look, I don't. When people say, and this is an important point I'm going to make, and I'm conscious of time here, but I've heard over and over again how people say, well, sex is natural. You have to allow people to experiment, kids to experiment, etc. How else do they learn, etc. And that's a strong argument. But an equally strong argument is that human beings are capable of abstaining from sex if they choose to do so. And part of the growing process of growing into maturity, an adult, as a human being, a human adult, is learning how to control your passions, whether they're whatever. It doesn't have to be necessarily sexual. And I've heard over and over again people say, well, that's not very natural and it leads to these problems and that. And my argument is, if you can do it, or if you can stop yourself from doing it, in either case, that's natural. So having, engaging in sexual activity is a natural thing. But abstaining from sexual activity because it's inappropriate in the circumstances that you find yourself in is a natural thing as well. But you have to have that opportunity to learn to say no to yourself. And sometimes you have to be in an environment where somebody's going to be there to say no for you. And with that, I think that we have to go for another break, Nick. So we are going to be, if you're listening to the show live, we'll be back in a few minutes. If you are listening to the podcast, we will catch you next time on the Nick and Joe Show on ThinkRadio.ca.